Hello, friends. Ken Graves here with God's Sword. It is time for us to dive into the final book of the Old Testament, Malachi. When did Malachi prophesy and minister? Well, it would seem well after the days of Haggai and Zechariah, or the prophecies that they made about a future that at least um, in the immediate hadn't been fulfilled. A glorious future that was way off. About a century after their return to the promised land from the exile in Babylon, clearly the house of the Lord has been rebuilt. So it's part of God's complaint against them, part of his reproof through the prophet Malachi is all about how they are conducting worship and the contempt that they seem to have for his house. So it is worth noting. All indications to me seems that it was either during or after the days of Nehemiah, as Nehemiah would become their governor, their civic leader. And Nehemiah would take on the mission of rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem to make them once again a legitimate city. The complaints, I should word them that way, the Lord's complaints, the things that Yahweh would rebuke them for through Malachi, happen to be the exact same things that he would confront them over through Nehemiah. I started to say the prophet Nehemiah, the governor. It is worth noting the difference between Ezra, who was among the earliest civic leaders that they had, and how Ezra led versus how Nehemiah led. Ezra would get brokenhearted and angry over their sin, that they would have the nerve to engage in some of the very same sins that cost them, the 70 years of captivity. He'd pull his own beard out, pull out his own hair. Not Nehemiah. Nehemiah would confront their leaders. He would line them up. He would pull out their beards. Nehemiah was confrontational, very. And I find that I think most of us who read this will see that, the corruption of the priesthood, the way, the contempt that the people have for the house of God and for the temple itself that has been rebuilt and the worship of Yahweh. Along with that, the word God uses is their treachery with regard to marriage. And the men, he holds them accountable, the treachery that they were guilty of against the wife of their youth. And these are things withholding what belongs to the Lord, the tithe that was supposed to go to the priests, all of those things that Nehemiah would confront directly are the things that the prophet Malachi likewise here confronts. So the timing has probably been around the same. Nehemiah's ministry, Malachi's, perhaps they were happening at the same time. Malachi chapter 1, verse 1, the oracle of the word of Yahweh to Israel by the hand of Malachi. I have loved you, says Yahweh. But you say, how have you loved us? Now, this is the first of what will be 7 sort of rhetorical questions. I don't know if they're rhetorical. Questions that Yahweh puts in their mouth. You're going to say to me, how have you loved us? There will be 7 of these. 7 is the number of completion. 7 times God will go, I can hear you now. You're asking how, why, right? And so, I have loved you, says Yahweh, but you say, how have you loved us? Was not Esau Jacob's brother, declares Yahweh. and I have loved Jacob, but I have hated Esau. And I have set his mountain to be a desolation, and his inheritance for the jackals of the wilderness. Though Edom says, we have been demolished, but we will return and build up the waste places. Thus says Yahweh of hosts. They may build, but I will pull down. And men will call them a territory of wickedness. And the people toward whom Yahweh is indignant forever. And your eyes will see this, and you'll say, Yahweh, be magnified beyond the territory of Israel. So the very first thing God says, I have loved you. Have I not loved Jacob and hated Esau? I'm no scholar, but I think the best scholars that I have read count this term, hate and love in this context, to literally mean loved less or in comparison, just as the Lord in Matthew chapter 6, he says you've got to hate your own father and mother. Now, you know, in that context, that he doesn't want us to hate anyone, but in comparison to the love that we have for him, everything else should be hated. In this, it's a comparative statement, a comparative kind of contrasting sort of, love-hate idea. God clearly has chosen Jacob, and he has rejected Esau. Now, that is probably the better word, chosen versus rejected. Just as it would be when God sent the prophet Samuel to the house of Jesse, for there was a king there. Jesse didn't know who, but as soon as he saw, Samuel didn't know who, but as soon as he saw Jesse's firstborn son, and he was handsome, and he was tall, he said, surely this is the Lord's anointed. Surely the Lord's anointed is standing before me right now. And it was the Spirit of God that rebuked the old prophet and said, never mind his stature or his appearance, for I have rejected him. And it was there that God said, I don't look like men do. He said, I'm God, and I look at the heart. God chose David. God rejected his oldest brother. Was it Eliab? God chose Jacob, and he rejected Esau. Now, my pastor Chuck, he always said if God has ever known, because God doesn't learn, if God has ever known who is going to respond to his grace, then he has always known. And based upon that foreknowledge, and I continue to connect it, I think the Apostle Paul does in Romans chapter 8, those whom God foreknew, he also did predestine. Foreknowledge is mentioned in the context of predestination, and it is the Apostle Paul who quotes Malachi in the 9th chapter of Romans, saying, Jacob I've loved and Esau I have hated. It is true that God connects predestination and foreknowledge together in the 8th chapter of Romans, and for some reason the Calvinist wants to separate God's foreknowledge from predestination in chapter 9 of Romans. Well, I don't. I'm not a Calvinist. My brothers who are, they maintain that foreknowledge has nothing to do with it, that God chooses for God's own sovereign will. Well, I have to believe, I share this with Pastor Chuck Smith, that God chooses based on what he already knows will ultimately happen. Now, God is pointing out through the prophet Malachi that the land of Edom, though they have all their pep rallies and say, we're going to rebuild, we'll rebuild. God said, I'll tear it down again. It's over. There is no Edom, but there is an Israel. Babylon came. Nations were conquered. Israel returned. Then in verse 6, chapter 1. A son honors his father, and a slave his master. Then if I am a father, where is my honor? And if I'm a master, where is the fear of me? Speaking of respect. Says Yahweh of hosts, to you, O priests, who despise my name. But you say, how have we despised your name? Second time. You're going to say to me, how have we despised your name? You are presenting defiled food upon my altar. But you say, how have we defiled you? And that you say the table of Yahweh is to be despised. But when you present the blind for sacrifice, is it not evil? When you present the lame and the sick, is it not evil? Please bring it near to your governor. Would he accept you? Would you give that to your official? Would you make that a gift to him, that which you're giving to me? You know what the law requires. The sacrifice be inspected by the priest and that it be without blemish. They are offering what is defiled, what would be rejected. Blind animals, sick animals. Thinking that, God, sure, you know what, is that good enough for God? God says, try that with your governor. Would he lift up your face, says Yahweh of hosts, but now entreat God's favor that he may be gracious to us. And with this thing which is from your hand, will he lift up any of your faces, says Yahweh of hosts? Oh, that there were one among you who would shut their gates, that you might not light a fire on my altar in vain. God says, you might as well just shut the doors. I actually wish that one of you would just shut the doors and end this, rather than, kindling a fire and then offering what is defiled. I have no delight in you, says Yahweh of hosts. So he confronts the priesthood to the prophet Malachi. And says Yahweh of hosts, nor will I accept any offering from your hand. For from the rising of the sun even to its setting, my name will be great among the nations. The psalmist likewise says, from the rising of the sun to the going down of the same, the name of Yahweh is to be praised. And I have said that, quoted that, and sung that to the Lord for most of my life, and only just realized that he's not just talking about, all day long, from the rising of the sun to the going down of the same. It's all around the world, where the sun rises and where the sun sets, worldwide. The name Yahweh should be praised, for he is the creator. And he says here, from the rising of the sun, even to its setting, my name will be great among the nations. And in every place, incense is going to be presented to my name, as well as a grain offering that is clean. For my name will be great among the nations, says Yahweh of hosts. God says, my name, his Yahweh will be great, no matter what you're doing with it. But you are profaning it, in that you say, the table of the Lord is defiled, and as for its food is to be despised. You also say, behold how tiresome it is. And you disdainfully sniff at it, says Yahweh of hosts. And you bring what was taken by robbery, what is lame or sick. So you bring the offering. Should I accept it from your hand, says Yahweh? But cursed be the swindler who has a male in his flock and vows it, but sacrifices a blemished animal to the Lord. For I am a great king, says Yahweh of hosts, and my name is feared among the nations. So the confrontation here, as God speaking through Malachi, that the priesthood is corrupt, and the worshipers of the nation are not giving God what he actually deserves. They're giving the defiled sacrifices. blind animals, rejected, the thing that they don't want, they give to God. And they say it's tiresome. Oh, this is such a hassle. So tiresome. They are in trouble with God for the things that they're saying or the things that they're thinking in their heart. And so he reproves them through the prophet. We would do well to learn to not be guilty of the same, giving God our castaways, our rubbish, but rather we should give him our best. We should offer to the Lord everything. We should not just go through the motions like it's some kind of a chore. I'm not saying that, that we got to always feel it. It's not about that. The just shall live by faith alone. Remember? Habakkuk already told us this. We can function by faith, but it's wrong for us to consider gathering with God's people in the New Testament sense just sort of a chore, something I got to do. No, something we get to do. Our heart attitude matters. God is watching it, and we likewise should, repent and adjust it if it's wrong. Our own heart, our own attitude. Well, there's your study for today. And tomorrow it'll come from the midweek service. We'll upload that here at Calvary. I have more work to do when it's still daylight, so thank you for taking the time. And if you have questions or comments, send them to ccbangor.org. All right? Grace and peace to you all.